Okay, well, I think we'll get started and allow for folks to log in as they are able to. And I just want to let everybody know that if you need to log off early, feel free to do that whenever you need to. We will be recording both today and tomorrow's workshops. So if you miss anything and you want to go back to it, I will be sharing the links to both of those recordings sometime early next week for you. I also just want to note that we do offer continuing education credits for this program. And I will send an email along with that link next week, asking you to let me know if you'd like to have credits reported for you. We'll do that through AIA Minnesota. If so, you'll just need to provide us with your AIA member number. So there will be an opportunity to do that. This program offers 5 hours of continuing education hours. All right, so thanks to those of you who've been able to log in. I hope that you find these 2 hours today and tomorrow to be worthwhile. I guess that's 4 hours in total, right? I want to just start off with an expression of gratitude for the consultants who I have worked with to help develop this curriculum, and that includes Airline Solutions, One UMA Consulting, Pink Consulting, Zemsgain Associates, IDI, and I'll also add in Team Dynamics and Listen to Lead consultants. So welcome to today's workshop, everyone. You should know by now that I'm Angie McKinley, and I'm on staff at AIA Minnesota. I'm the Director of Equity for our state component, and I've been with AIA Minnesota for about 8 years. I've moved into the role of Director of Equity within the last 3 years. And as part of my role, I currently facilitate some workshops and training programs around intercultural development. This is one of them. We also host a more intensive 10-week cohort-based program called National Intercultural Leadership Program. Some of your colleagues may have participated in that program last fall. We do anticipate hosting that program again at the end of 2021, between September and December. So if that's something you're interested in, I can add you to our email list. We'll be sharing details about how to get registered for that program later on in the spring. So as we're starting off today's workshop, with it being a more interactive and participatory program today, I'd like to save some time for us to be able to introduce one another. I'm sure you're all very familiar with one another, but I have been meeting with you one-on-one, some of you, but I would love to get to know you and hear your introduction formally. So I'm going to ask that we take a moment to just share an introduction, and I will get started. I'll just kind of call on folks as they appear in my window, so if that's all right. You are not required to turn on your camera at any point. Do whatever is most comfortable for you. So my name is Angie, as I said. Today we're going to be doing a lot of pattern spotting and awareness building. And one of the things we'll build awareness around is all of the different cultural identities that we hold. And so as a way to practice that, I'd like to invite each of you to, as you introduce yourself, share 2 identities that you hold. And you don't need to include an explanation with them. So my name is Angie. I am with AIA Minnesota. 2 identities that I hold are a mother and a runner. And I'll pass it to Paul next if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Oh, I get to go first. Hi, Paul, past president, Idi associate principal at AOS Architects. I guess I'm a New Jerseyan and father.
Great. Thank you, Paul. Good to have you here. Soha, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Sure. I'm Soha Sinjust. I'm the current president of the AIA Philadelphia chapter, and just want to quickly thank everybody in the chapter and all the committee chairs and board members for participating in this. Really, excited to be a part of this. And two identities that I hold are that affect me, that have been affecting me the most in life lately. Probably daughter of Indian immigrants and mother of two beautiful biracial daughters.
Wonderful. Thank you, Soha. Kevin, I have you next in my view. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Angie. My name is Kevin Malowski. I'm the Director of Advocacy for AIA Philly. And two identities which I hold are one as a husband and the second as a proud Philadelphian.
Great. Thank you very much. And Fatima, you are next if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure, I am Fatima Veri. I am the current AIA Philadelphia Director of Design. I'm also a principal at Kieran Timberlake here in the city, and two identities are multilingual person and woman.
Great. Excellent. Thanks, Fatima. Bunny, would you like to go next?
Sure. Bunny Tucker. I am co-chair of AIA Philly Coat, and I'm an environmentalist and a rock climber.
Fantastic. Thanks for being here. Katie, I have you next in my view. Maybe Katie has, oh, there you are.
Hi, sorry, I wasn't sure that you actually said my name.
No worries.
Sorry. Katie Perot. I'm a co-chair of the Owners Roundtable for AIA Philadelphia.
Katie, I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing you.
Because
Sorry.
I did that. I was having a bite of my sandwich. So two identities. Let's see. Female architect, I guess, is an identity. And I guess I would say parent.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sounds great. And I know this is taking place over the lunch hour, so Katie and others, feel free to do what you need to feed yourselves and make yourselves comfortable during these 2 hours. So eat away if you need to. Ross Silverman, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Ross Silverman. I'm the director of the Philadelphia Emerging Architects, and two identities I identify with. I'm from a Jewish heritage and a photographer.
Lovely. Thanks, Ross. Michael Johns, you're up next, if you'd like to go.
Good afternoon. Michael Johns, principal of M Designs and MWJ Consulting. I'm the director of Equitable Communities for AIA Philadelphia, and two identities are Black, male, and architect.
Wonderful. Thanks, Michael. Megan Finney, would you like to go next?
Sure. So I'm Megan Finney. I'm Director of Communications at Voith and McTavish Architects, also co-chair of the Historic Preservation Committee. And two identities that are important to me are wife and volunteer.
Great. Thanks very much, Megan. Erin, you're next in my windows, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Erin Bork. I'm on the AIA board. And two identities. Wow, this is a tough one. I would say New Englander and architect, which seems sort of obvious, but yeah, architect. But that's who I do highly identify with.
Great, perfect. Thanks, Erin. David Hincher, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi. Sorry, running back over here from the job site. David Hincher. I'm co-chair of the Committee on the Environment. Two identities for myself would be rural Southerner, where I grew up, and volunteer, trying to push for equitable, low carbon future.
Those are great. Thanks, David. Let's see, Danielle, I see you next. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, Danielle DeLeo Kim. I'm on the AIA board, Executive Director of Philadelphia 250. And that actually is interesting because it makes me have kind of two competing identities, whereas I am the Executive Director on the board that I manage, and then I serve as board member on a number of other boards. So having those two kind of interesting identities.
Absolutely. Thanks, Danielle. Sophia, I have you next in my windows. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Okay, so I see here, my name is Sophia Lee. My role on the AIA board is an at-large member. I'm at Jacobs Engineering Group in the Philadelphia office. And one identity I would say is an American Korean, hyphenated, and another would be academic architect.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sophia. Jeff Goldstein, would you like to go next? Oh, maybe Jeff has stepped away. We'll come back to him. Let's see, let's move on to Clarissa.
Hi, everyone. I'm Clarissa Kelsey. I am a director at large on the AIA Philadelphia board and an associate architect at Stantec. Two identities for me are a Black female architect and a dog mom.
Wonderful. Thanks, Clarissa. Phil Burkett, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Phil Burkett, principal at Meyer Architects, also on the AIA board as director of firm culture. Two identities, and I apologize, I came in late, so I'm hoping I'm answering them right. So two identities would be just husband and father.
Wonderful, that's perfect. Thanks, Phil. Stephen, I have you next in my windows. Would you like to make an introduction?
Yeah, sure. And I also have to apologize for tuning in a little late. We've had a little bit of a chaos in our household with an ill, one of our kids has gotten sick. So where one of my identities might have been architect, I might switch that to parent because that's taking a lot of my, a lot of our thinking right now. He's going to be fine, but it's been a scary couple of weeks. Identities, what I think I would say in the context of this is, I think and again, I'm not sure if I answer or frame the question right. They're positive things I aspire towards, but when I think about identities, I have to say it's hard to escape my white maleness. I feel like that influences a lot of how I kind of pass through interactions with people and how I see people react to me, and so that's kind of trying to be aware of that is a big part of, I think, my identity, if that makes any sense. Not
absolutely.
And then I think another thing I spend a lot of time with is kind of firm ownership. The architecture, that's not the designing part, which I love, but the stresses of trying to keep everything moving. So I'm sort of describing not like smooth identities that help shape, the beautiful me, but like the kind of like prickly ones that are, I don't know, that you out when you hit the rails. So
That's great. I love the way that you characterize those as prickly. Those are perfect. Thank you. And I'm glad to hear that your child is going to be okay. It's always so stressful.
Yeah.
Well, and for everyone, step into and out of this session today as you need to. I understand that life is competing with this time, so please feel free to do what you need to take care of yourself. Let's see, Jeff, would you like to make an introduction?
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
I'm Jeff. I think I'm the only Jeff. I was just on a call where there were 3 Jeffs. I'm Jeff Goldstein. I'm an architect and partner at Digsaw and the president-elect at AIA Philadelphia, and 2 identities that I hold. That of a father and a husband.
Perfect. Wonderful. Thanks for joining us, Jeff. Let's see. I see Ballinger. And I'm not sure who that is.
Hi, everyone. This is Sarah Ridenauer from Ballinger. I don't know why, but Ballinger comes up on my Zoom. Nice to see you all. I'm an associate principal of Ballinger, and I am part of the AIA Active Design Healthy Communities Committee. So for my 2 identities, I'll just list what takes the most of my time and attention, and it's architect and mom. And that includes dog mom, child plus dog.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sarah, for joining us today. I appreciate it. And Modesto.
Hi, everyone. My name is Modesto Vigas Varedon. I am a senior associate at WRT, also a co-chair of the Urban Design Committee with Aaron and Sophia. And my 2 identities are a Latino of Puerto Rican ethnicity and a father-husband. I think those 2 go hand in hand. Can't separate one from the other. But, all right. Thank you.
Thank you, Modesto. Good to have you here. Is there anyone that I have missed? Okay, great. Well, thanks again, everyone, for introducing yourselves. Let's see. So just to give you a sense for what to expect today, we're going to be, and this applies to tomorrow as well, we'll be regrounding in some of the concepts that I introduced to us early in the webinar, which probably seems like ages ago. So we'll kind of reacquaint ourselves with some of those concepts. We'll also do some awareness building of our individual cultural identities through some interactive experiences. We'll also work to build awareness of our organizational culture and our industry's culture. And finally, we will identify some ways that our organizational culture, our values, policies, processes can be unintentionally inhibiting diversity, equity, and inclusion. So a lot of awareness building during the next 2 days. That's a lot of the work of building your intercultural competence is bringing a lot of different things into your conscious awareness, where as they normally reside sometimes in our subconscious awareness. I want to name, some protocols for the way that we engage with one another today. Along with awareness building, we're going to be practicing a lot of pattern spotting. This is a practice that is really helpful in helping us grow our intercultural competence just being really intentional about noticing and naming as specifically as possible what you are experiencing, observing, describing. I also want to name that we are all in charge of the choices that we have at our disposal, and you each have the ability to choose how much discomfort you're going to step into and out of today. For those of you who I've met with privately, we talk a lot about discomfort and that it's a place where growth occurs, but it's also a really awkward feeling to be sitting in that discomfort. So each of you gets to decide how much you're gonna push yourself into that realm today. I do wanna just name as well though that discomfort is a privilege, and comfort is a privilege. Discomfort can be a really helpful catalyst to help us experience that growth. I also want to invite everyone to practice maintaining a posture of curiosity today. Try to stay in a place of being objectively curious and kind of suspending your tendency to draw assumptions or draw conclusions. And finally, understand that we don't all have to agree today or anytime. We just have to, what we like to call, receive and believe. Understand that someone else's experience is true and valid and their own, and it's okay if that differs from your experience, and it likely will. So with those protocols and ways of engagement named and identified, I also want to extend one more invitation to you all. Often in US workplace culture, we're asked to kind of detach our brains from our hearts and use only our brains. And so today I invite you to be in your head and thinking about and being aware of the thoughts and questions that come up for you. I invite you to also be in your heart and tune into the emotions that are coming up for you. And also to be in your body. Take action, try a thing, do a thing. Also, get up and walk around if you need to. Lay down on the floor and do some stretching if you need to. Whatever you need to do to take care of your body, please feel welcome to do that today. So with those intentions laid out, I want to just get started with our IDI assessment. As I mentioned, I've met with many of you over the past 3 weeks to talk through the results of the IDI assessment that many of you completed online. I want to ask for your feedback. What has it been like to complete this assessment? What has it been like to think about and read through and digest the results from that assessment for those of you who have taken it? Feel free to speak up or type into the chat box any of your reactions. And if for those of you who have not had an opportunity to complete the assessment, if that's something that you're still interested in doing and just couldn't fit it into your schedule when it was available to you, feel free to reach out to me by email and I can kind of reopen the portal that allows you to complete that assessment. I'm going to open up the chat box. Anybody have any reactions they want to share?
I guess my first reaction to completing the assessment was sort of making sure that I was being honest with my answers and not just sort of responding in a way that that's the way you should think. You know what I mean? Sort of based on your what sort of you think society may want to hear, or what you should and how you should answer, and just sort of making sure that, or trying to as best to make sure that the answers were as authentic for me. So I think that was something that I got from that.
Thanks, Michael, for sharing that observation and for naming the fact that there is sometimes a tension between what you think should be the answer and what you honestly feel is the answer. And I think that's a tension that is hard to navigate. And sometimes those two things are so intertwined, it's hard to tell the difference, right? So that's definitely a challenge when you're thinking about this topic. Well, feel free to continue to think about that and post reactions in the chat box if you would like. The IDI assessment, as you all know, is a tool used for individuals to kind of give you a measurement of how you're engaging with cultural difference, kind of where your capacity to interact with cultural difference lies currently. We can also use that tool as within a group setting. And so I'd like to take a few minutes to show you. I did compile a group profile for you all as board members and committee leaders. And the assessment can be a really helpful tool with a group in kind of revealing the tendencies of a group when making decisions or setting policies or creating processes for doing things. We tend to have a perspective or an orientation that we operate from as a group. And before I show you those results, I just want to kind of reacquaint ourselves with the continuum of this framework. As you recall, this theory supposes that we move on a predictable path when we're developing our skills in this area, from a very kind of simplistic, basic set of tools to a very diverse and complex set of tools. We begin in the mindset or orientation or developmental stage of denial here on the right, and we move through these stages of development as we gain more exposure to cultural difference. And you'll see the text that is positioned next to each of these developmental stages describe things about those stages. So the text in purple next to each of these mindsets show the characteristics or what we tend to experience when we're operating from that stage of development. The green text shows kind of the strengths of each of these stages or the skills that we're working on developing. The red text describes the challenges that we face when we are operating from each of these mindsets. And the blue text describes the growth opportunities in front of us as we continue to move through that stage of development and into the following stage of development. This graph kind of shows how, based on the millions of assessments that have been completed around the world, this is the current kind of breakdown of how folks around the world tend to fall within this 5 different orientations or developmental stages. So you can see here that the vast majority of population falls within this mindset of minimization. There are actually very few folks in the world who are operating at kind of the ends of that continuum, either in the early stage of denial or that final multicultural stage of adaptation. So hopefully that's helpful for you in kind of giving you some context about how the rest of the world operates. So based on those of you who took the assessment and the aggregation of your individual scores, this is showing the measurements of your group on the continuum. And As many of you know, this assessment tool provides 2 different measurements for you individually and at the group level. So for this group, your perceived orientation is falling within that later stage of development that we call acceptance. Many of you probably remember that this measurement is something that we look at as aspirational, or a reflection of your intent when interacting with cultural difference. The bar graph underneath that, that's titled developmental orientation, is measuring your group as having a capacity or ability to engage with cultural difference within that minimization stage. As we saw in that bell graph, minimization is where most of the world is operating, and it follows that a lot of entities, groups, organizations, companies are also operating within that minimization stage of development. So what does that mean for you as a group of people who are tasked with leadership of your organization? The implications for a group operating in minimization are very much the same as for individuals operating in minimization. And I love this Far Side cartoon because I feel like it really captures the essence of how we are operating in the world when we're in this stage of minimization. Roy is being greeted by aliens from another planet here, and you know, he's shaking their hands because he has a hand and he knows that that's what he uses his hand for. That's the custom in his world. What he is not realizing, however, is that maybe that hand on the alien is actually a head. And so in his attempts to be welcoming and collegial, he may be in fact causing a lot of harm, but his intentions are great, right? This is kind of the essence of a group operating in minimization as well. Our intentions are really great, and we are interpreting the world through our own lived experiences, through our own cultural lenses. That's what we know. And so we're operating from that perspective. And we're really interested in understanding the commonalities that we all share and pointing those out and emphasizing those, and kind of downplaying the differences that might cause some conflict. So the challenge for you as a group operating within minimization is to really stay in a position and posture of analysis and evaluation. Reflect on the instances when you may feel like you're minimizing those differences in an effort to hang on to that sense of comfort and to avoid addressing conflict. That can be a sign that we're missing some really important cultural differences. So keep that in mind as you're meeting as a board and as committee leaders. There will be other kind of opportunities for us to apply this learning throughout the rest of the 2 workshops, but I just wanted to give you that understanding of kind of where your group is falling on the continuum. So there's some key takeaways for today and tomorrow's workshops, and they're presented here on the screen in front of you. If you take nothing else away from this experience, I want you to remember that identity is always present. We always carry all of our cultural identities with us. We might be prioritizing one or another identity in any given situation, but our other identities never fully disappear. They're always with us. Culture always matters. We are always engaging with cultural differences. Even if the person we're engaging with looks and sounds exactly like us, we are still engaging with cultural differences. So, you know, while a lot of us tend to think first of the cultural dimensions of race or gender or ethnicity, when we think about cultural differences, there are so many more dimensions to culture that that cause differences between us and somebody else. And part of the work of improving our intercultural competence is recognizing all of those more subtle, less visible cultural differences that always matter. Finally, we always have many choices at our disposal. Intercultural competence work is all about recognizing the strategies and the tools that are at your disposal in any given situation. And as we continue to move on that continuum and increase our skills and master the skills that we've picked up along the way, that just serves to diversify our choices that are set out in front of us. So keep that in mind when you are engaging with cultural difference, that you always have a choice. So here is the kind of a visual representation of some of those concepts that I introduced when you watched the introductory webinar. And so what I'd like us to do is kind of reground ourselves in the definitions of these concepts. And I'm going to ask that we divide up into some small groups. We'll use our breakout room function within Zoom. And I'd like to assign each group to one of these concepts and ask you to, as a small group, make a list of the things that you recall from the webinar as definitions or key things to remember about each of these concepts. And we'll have about 5 minutes in our small groups to be able to do that. And then we'll come back together and kind of do a harvest or a share back with each group kind of teaching back to us what they were able to come up with. I'm just gonna open up my breakout room screen here so I can assign everybody.
And are we going to have this assignment when we get in the group? Because I'm not sure I understand what we're doing.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll put it in the chat, but I'll explain it one more time for you. So I'm going to break you out into 5 different groups, and I will assign each group one of the concepts or terms that I defined in the webinar. The kind of visual representation of each of those terms is here on the screen in front of you. So starting with the top left and going clockwise, the terms are equity, which is the image you see of the 3 people standing at what looks like could be a fence with a couple of clouds over them. That term is equity. In the upper right-hand corner, we have the term culture. In the lower right-hand corner of the screen, the term there is inclusion. And the term in the bottom left corner of your screen is the term diversity. Sorry, there's only 4. Did I say 5? And so I'm going to break you out into small groups, and before I send you to your groups, I will assign you to one of the terms so that when you get into your breakout rooms, you know what term you've been assigned to. And I'll give you 5 minutes to make a list of everything you remember about that term from our webinar. Is that a little bit more clear for you, Jeff? Anybody have other questions? Okay, great. So I'm going to just read your breakout room assignments here. In room 1, it's going to be Sarah, Danielle, Katie, Megan, and Michael. So room 1, I'm going to give you the term equity. And I'll write these into the chat as well. Room 2 is comprised of Bunny, Aaron, Kevin, Modesto, and Sophia. And room 2, the term that you will be responsible for defining is culture. Room 3 is comprised of Clarissa, Fatima, Jeff, Paul, and Stephen. And your term is going to be inclusion. And room 4, the last room, is David, Bill, Ross, and Soha. And the term that you'll be responsible for defining is diversity. Everybody clear on which room you are in? If not, I can read those rooms again. All right. So as soon as I finish getting this into the chat, I will send you off to your breakout rooms, and I will give you a time check when there are 2 minutes remaining. So group number 1, you had the term of equity to define. Would anyone from group number 1 like to share what you were able to come up with during your time?
Hi, this is Katie. So we collected a series of descriptors for what equity means. And the first one was that it does not mean being equal. And that equity is acknowledging that we're not all starting from the same point or the same place, that we don't all have the same experiences that we bring to the table. And equity is when there are means by which to level the playing field and allow for understanding those differences that people come to a situation with. And then the other piece that we started talking a little bit about is that equity is also having what you individually need in the situation, and that each person needs a different thing in order to be at an equal playing field.
Absolutely. Great job, you guys. You got all the super important points of that definition. Exactly. So it's important to realize equity is not the same thing as equality. They're very different. And you're right, equity is all about recognizing that we may need to distribute resources differently for each person, right? And come up with a customized resource to get each person to the outcome that we're looking for. Yeah. Equality is really focused on resources and making sure everybody has the same resources. Equity is different in that it's really focused on the outcome and how do we get folks to achieve the same outcome or to the same goal. Absolutely. Equity is also all about not being able to predict the outcome. For instance, in our profession currently, right now we can predict with pretty good accuracy who's rising to the top of the profession, who's gaining recognition, who is getting advancements, right? And when we are in truly an equitable environment, we are not going to be able to predict who's going to rise to the top. And that's a lovely thing. Thank you very much, Group 1, for sharing, and thanks, Katie, for being the spokesperson.
No problem.
All right, Group 2, you had the term culture to define. Who'd like to share from Group 2 what you were able to come up with?
I can kind of talk about some of them, and I'll be full disclosure that I kind of used the notes that I had from our meeting last time that I'd taken. So I kind of am regurgitating back to what you said to us. But to start with, we did try and have a discussion regarding our own culture and what that means. I mean, it did start have a little bit of that, and then we actually opened up the dictionary about culture, and we realized that there's some things that do talk about that. But from the meeting that we had last time, one of the things you shared is that culture is often used to determine what is and what isn't appropriate and has meaning. But in reality, it's more than just race, and it's more than ethnicity. It's also about age, religion, professional roles, social class, gender, and orientation. And there's things that are in our awareness, and there's things that are not in our awareness that can help, that are part of culture that we might not be perceiving. And then I remembered that story you mentioned about the Japanese businessman going and eating and eating and eating and not stopping because he didn't realize that culturally he needed to leave food on his plate because he wasn't aware of his surroundings and what it meant, how to communicate with the people with him. Anybody else want to jump in? Feel free.
I think Erin's got it. Thanks, Erin.
Second that.
Fantastic. Nice job, group 2. That's exactly right. Again, you hit all the major points about culture. Absolutely. We talk about culture being 3 things. It's a series of patterns of behavior. So as we are being pattern spotters, what we're doing is helping ourselves build awareness around patterns of culture, cultural patterns that we're experiencing, that we're observing. So patterns of behavior that we use to make meaning about what's appropriate and what's not appropriate in a cultural group. Absolutely. And you also nailed it with the difference between subjective culture, those things that are sticking out above the waterline of this iceberg, things that are really easy for us to spot visually, and subjective culture that are much less visible, often nonverbal, very complex, and often need to be navigated in order for us to understand those aspects of culture. Excellent job. Thank you very much, group 2, and thanks, Erin. All right, moving on to group 3. Your term was inclusion. What did you come up with for a definition of inclusion?
We're a shy bunch, I guess. We actually spent a lot of time talking about how inclusion fits within the other categories a fair bit. Fatima had started us out talking about where things like culture and diversity are about characteristics of who we are, and equity is kind of like a goal to kind of aim towards. This kind of concept of inclusion has to do with the tools we use to be better listeners, to kind of create a framework where no one person is drowning out everyone else, but that requires both, I guess, a context in which you're as individuals, we're trying not to yell over each other, conceptually, but also we've created a structural way of interacting with each other where we're attuned to actually trying to listen. So we're trying to be, that sense of a balanced inclusion has, taps into this idea that you have to be on the same, to be able to hear each other, you've got to be listening. So there's something about that. Scratch the surface. Then we were chatting away, but what am I forgetting, guys? Anything
I
else?
would say that it was about kind of not just so the pizza analogy, right? If equity is that everyone has the amount of pizza that makes them fulfilled, inclusion is about having the space and the resources and the venue for people to feel comfortable identifying what number of pizza slices they want, and also celebrating that as celebrating the different voices. So in the example, like we talked about the megaphone, not everyone might need the megaphone to feel that they're being heard. And so inclusion is having that space and the resources for each person's voice or identities to be valued, not just heard and celebrated. That then can lead to the equity, because if you don't feel comfortable asking for the pizza or talking about the pizza, then it's hard to get to having the right number of pizza slices for yourself.
And opportunity is the other word to go with that. Without giving the opportunity to have pizza, you can't have the equity of the pizza.
Absolutely.
Lunchtime, we use the pizza one a lot.
Yeah. I like the pizza analogy too. Thank you. That was really great. And I appreciated the fact that you provided that context as to how it relates to the other terms that we're defining today. That's really important as well, not only to understand what these terms mean, but how they work together with one another. And you're exactly right. I heard you say a lot of being heard and having the space to speak up. And that's exactly what inclusion is all about. It's not only giving everybody a space at the table or a seat at the table, but it's also allowing space for everybody to self-report that, yes, I have that just full enough satisfied feeling because I received the right amount of pizza. So it's often measured within a, from an HR context. Inclusion is often measured by employee satisfaction surveys, polling the employees to find out if they are reporting back that they feel included. And another thing that I think you highlighted, which is very critical, is we can give someone a seat at the table and ask them to speak, but if we are telling them that you must fit this mold in order to have that seat at the table and speak, then that is defeating all the purposes, that's defeating the purpose of inclusion, right? So bringing your authentic self to the table is a critical piece of this puzzle of inclusion, because without the ability for each of us to be our whole selves and our authentic selves at the table, we're not reporting in an authentic, honest way, right? Thanks very much. Great job, group 3. And our final group, group 4, was responsible for the term diversity. What did you come up with, group 4?
So our group was Phil, David, and Ross. And I think maybe Brian joined us. I think I saw his name towards the end.
Yeah.
So we talked about the different types of diversity, and essentially that diversity is what makes us different. It's the human difference in many different lenses and forms. And so we listed a lot of those out, and then we talked a little bit about the impact of diversity and how that there's a strength of diversity. And David was very good to point out from the first workshop that diversity in itself means nothing. It doesn't mean anything unless you have inclusion and the intercultural competence to make space for that inclusion. So, that was really a great recollection and point that they made. And it's really celebrating what's different is an acknowledgement that everybody does have a different background, and it's not really about grouping everybody together. It's about acknowledging that there is a difference between everyone.
Absolutely. Nice work, group 4. Thank you very much. That's again, you hit the high points. So you guys were obviously paying attention to that webinar. Diversity is the fact of human difference, as Soha mentioned. And it also creates nothing, right? We are told a lie that if we only have diverse teams, the magic is going to happen. And so it's important to remember that there's nothing magical about lots of different kinds of people in a room together in proximity to one another. That's exactly right. So there's other ingredients required to make that diversity work for us, right? So thank you very much. I appreciate that. We can also, I use as shorthand, diversity is simply just counting the people, right? It's just a number. So thanks to everybody. You all did fantastic. And I appreciate the fact that you took away the really critical essences of these definitions and demonstrate that you've got a really good understanding of not only how these terms are defined, but also how they are required to work in conjunction with one another to create the kind of environment that we're all striving to create. Before we move on to our next segment of this workshop, I do want to just allow everyone to take a break and step away from your screen if you need to, take care of some work or emails, take care of your kids, your dogs, cats. So I'm going to allow us a 6-minute break here. We'll come back together at about 12:15. Am I doing my math right? 12:14, 12:15, yeah. We'll just say 12:15, nice round number. So feel free to step away and join us again in a few minutes. Welcome back, everyone. So for the final portion of our workshop today, we'll be taking a look at some of the ways that we can draw conclusions or make assumptions that can inadvertently cause us to miss a lot of cultural difference, or to miss those really important aspects of cultural difference, or make assumptions about those that are incorrect and kind of lead us down the wrong path. We all, tell stories, right? And it's a human instinct to kind of fill in the gaps of what we're observing and kind of, do that using storytelling, right? This is a survival instinct and strategy for a lot of us. It's kind of that lizard brain function that some people like to refer to. It helps us to stay alive and to evaluate the scenarios where we may be in a situation of danger. But it also can trip us up a lot and lead us down problematic paths. I am reading Isabel Wilkerson's book right now called Path, The Origins of Our Discontent. Maybe some of you have read it or have it on your bookshelves or in your library loan list. It's a really excellent book. And in one chapter of her book, she simply lists a series of different scenarios where folks have been, assumptions have been made, and those assumptions have been wrong, incorrect, and have led to some really harmful consequences. I will, read one of them to you here. A college professor in Chicago had just returned from a bike ride and picked up his mail in the lobby of his apartment building off Michigan Avenue. He was African American, in his 30s, patrician of face, still in his helmet and cycling gear. He stepped onto the elevator en route to his floor, and barely noticing the other man on the elevator with him, he began going through his mail. He saw something of interest and unsealed one of the envelopes. The other man in the elevator was horrified. "You're supposed to be delivering the mail, not opening it." This seemed to have come out of nowhere, and the college professor looked up and saw that the other man was white, but didn't fully register the accusation, was just going about his day, and gave an honest reply. "Oh, I wanted to see what's inside," the professor said. The other man looked even more stricken now, shaking his head in disgust, mistakenly believing he was witnessing a crime in progress. The professor got off his floor, and only later did it occur to him that he'd been taken for a delivery boy in his own building, an assumption so ludicrous he hadn't bothered to consider it in the moment, which left the dominant caste man convinced that he had just seen a black messenger brazenly break open an actual resident's mail in full view of another resident. This is a self-perpetuating mischief of caste. And this is also, I think, a really good illustration of the process that we go through when we are taking in information about a scenario that's unfolding in front of us. And as I mentioned, you know, the lizard brain portion of us fills in the gaps of what we're seeing to ensure that, you know, we're going to be in a safe place, and that helps determine how we need to react. But in a lot of cases, and many of these scenarios have been publicized in the news over the past year. There are folks, mainly white folks, observing Black folks doing an everyday activity, but drawing incorrect assumptions, and it often results in some really negative consequences. So I'm going to play a video for each of you. This is a video that's about a minute long. There's no sound, so there's nothing to hear, but I invite you to just observe the video and pay attention to what's going on. I'll play the video through twice, just so everybody has a good chance to make observations. And then following this video, I'll divide us up back into our small groups, and we'll have about 5 minutes or so to kind of itemize or describe what we saw going on in the video. And then we'll come back together as a large group and share our observations. So I'm going to play the video through twice. Again, it has no sound. Okay, I'm going to play the video through one more time here. Okay. So I'll break you up now into breakout rooms, and let's take 8 minutes to come up with that description of what's going on, and then we'll come back into large group and share back.
Our first dialogue about it, and then we were walking through the whole process of the video, and her coming in second, sitting down in motion, like in line, her taking the food that he was offering to her after he had eaten it, and it looked like she didn't like it and set it aside, and then the bowing motion happened, and so we were looking at that saying, is he bringing her back into alignment? Like, did she just differentiate herself and say, no, I don't actually, like everything to that point, she had been keeping in her subservient mode. And then by rejecting the food, that was her act of denial. And then he brought her back into alignment through the bowing process. And then she left in sequence and in order again, relative to that. So that was like one way that we were reading it. And so,
okay.
But again, agreeing that the context of it matters a lot. And then we had some dialogue about how you can read, how people come to situations and read them differently, and acknowledging that his reading of a situation and how he's giving her food might, he's perceiving that he's offering something and coming to the table, and her perception of it could be very different.
Great. Excellent. Good observations. Group one, everybody did a wonderful job. Thanks for doing that. So I have been listing all of the observations that you shared with the group, and I'll just, before I do that, I'm going to go back to sharing my screen so that we can talk about why we just did this exercise. So as we talked about before, this idea that we all kind of fill in the gaps and make stories when we're not given context, right? Group 4 talked about that context piece that was missing here. And so we were left to kind of wonder about what that context was. And a lot of times we do that filling in of the gaps through our own lived experiences, right? And through our own cultural lenses. And so the stuff that we fill in tends to be stuff that we're familiar with, that we've experienced before. And that's kind of where we can get tripped up, because a lot of times that may not be what's happening at all. So I'd like to introduce a strategy for us to use when we are pattern spotting, and to help us slow down when we're observing something unfolding before us, and staying in that posture of curiosity, suspending our instinct to draw assumptions and make conclusions. And we call this DIE. It has a very unfortunate acronym, but it stands for Describe, Interpret, Evaluate. This acronym describes the 3 stages that our brains go through when we're taking in and processing information, external stimuli, right? So we start out in a place of objective analysis. We're gathering in the information, noticing what's happening around us. This is a stage that before we come to any conclusions. But very quickly, within a matter of seconds, our brain moves from this objective place of describing to a subjective place of interpretation. It's analyzing and articulating what's happening in front of us and making sense of it. So what we think we're seeing and observing. This is when we're tying the stimulation that we're taking into something that's familiar or experiential, something that we've lived through already, so that we can make sense of it, right? And then the third stage that our brains move to is a place of evaluation. We begin to assign values and judgments to the stimulus that we're taking in and the observations that we're encountering, so that we can determine whether this is appropriate, whether this is inappropriate, whether this requires us to take some sort of action, right? Whether we need to escape or leave the situation for our own safety. This is a determination stage. And because our brains are trained to so quickly move through these 3 stages, we tend to move to that assumption stage, that conclusion stage, in a matter of just seconds, a handful of seconds. So this acronym can help us remain in that describe phase as long as we can before we move on to interpreting and evaluating, which can help us to avoid making assumptions before we have all the information at our disposal. It can also help us to stay in that position of curiosity and wondering, what are all the things that could be happening here? And as you guys just demonstrated within your small groups, that's something that you did. You actually wondered, what are all of the possibilities that could help us explain and understand this video that we just experienced, this scene that played out in front of us. So I'd like to just go back to the list of observations that you made and see if we can identify which observations would fall into the describe phase, which might fall into the interpretation phase, and which may be based in a posture of valuation or judgment. Anybody see anything in this list that would belong in this describe phase?
Just the no contact, but no eye contact between 2 people.
Yeah, that's a very descriptive observation. There's not a lot of judgment or interpretation in that observation, right?
He was wearing shoes, she wasn't.
Yep, absolutely.
She came into the room second.
Right.
His hand never touched her head when she was bowing.
Yeah, I would highlight all of that except for bowing, because
good point.
we saw her move,
Right.
her body moving up and down. Could be bowing.
Right, could be something else.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah.
It looked
How
like
about-
she didn't like food.
And that would probably fall into an interpretation stage. So let's make that a different color here. We'll make that green. We're making an interpretation that that she had an emotion about something, or that she had a reaction about something. We don't know for sure that her reaction equated that she didn't like the food. She did make a change in her facial makeup, right? She used the muscles in her face to change her facial expression. But I think we can imply that there's an interpretation in that observation. Any other observations?
The he mimed, then passed it to her, but I would almost say, like, well, is the eating part, is that interpretive?
I would say so.
I mean, he's definitely miming something in passing. I was wondering if, like,
the woman has her hands in front of her. That's I would say, description.
Yep.
Because we not talk about what that meant.
And her head was bowed. But
yeah.
That was sort of the same sentence. Her eye contact.
Yeah. How about an evaluation statement? Anything in here belong in that category of evaluation? So making a judgment or an evaluation?
Handmaid's Tale vibe?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good example of that.
Not enough context.
Yeah, that's true. That's we're evaluating that we don't have enough information to draw any conclusions.
How about it was a negative scenario?
Yeah, definitely. Words like negative, positive, like or didn't like.
So does dominant, subservient kind of language fit in the third category or the second category? Because we're not being judgy about how we feel about dominance and subversion. We're just noting or sort of, I don't know, detecting patterns or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's right, Stephen. I would probably place that into the interpretation stage because we're not necessarily making a comment about how we feel about dominance and subservience. Yeah, excellent. I think one of the things that always surprises me when I go through this exercise is how quickly we move to that stage of interpretation and evaluation without even realizing it, right? It's so subconsciously ingrained in the way that we process information that it can be really tricky to stop yourself at that describe phase. So that's my challenge to you over the next 24 hours before we meet again. We're at our time and I want to be respectful of allowing you to move on with your day, but I do want to invite you to, over the next 24 hours, see how often you can bring your consciousness and awareness to a place where you're remaining in that describe phase as you're watching TV, as you're listening to the radio, watching commercials, talking with your spouse or others in your family. See if you can build awareness about how long you stay in that describe phase and how quickly you tend to move into evaluation and interpretation. I think it'll surprise you. So thank you, everybody, for spending these last 2 hours with me. I recognize how fatiguing it is to stare at a screen for 2 hours. So thank you very much for your time today. And I hope that I will see many of you tomorrow. I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon and your evening. So take care, everybody.
Thank you, Angie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.